Hey, hey, hey. Welcome to the show. My name is Kevin Davani. Welcome to the Kevin Davani Connection Show. So, my very special guests are Joe and Luke. Joe, I've already had you on. Thanks so much again for coming back on. Luke, you're the first time here. Let's just start off with you, Luke. Can you just give a little bit background about yourself? Like where you come from? You write also like Joe, beautiful articles, saying like end of all cycles and about the hyper-Bitcoinization process. So welcome to the show. Can you just start off and introduce yourself a little bit? Thanks.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, guys. Really excited to be here. Just a Bitcoiner, just a pleb from Australia in my early 20s. Took the Bitcoin orange pill in 2018 and haven't looked back. Just been absolutely obsessed with Bitcoin since 2018. And, the further you go down the rabbit hole, the more convinced you get. And then the more convinced you get, the more you've got to tell everyone around you about what's coming. So that's me. That's why I'm here. Just trying to educate as many plebs as I can.
Yeah, I love your accent, by the way, your Australian dialect. Well, we're going to talk about Australia. I do want to talk about, a really very specific topic that, sort of touches our very own, the core of our existence and freedom. But before we go there, Joe, yeah, you are a analyst. Can I call you analyst at Mimesis Capital? You also write brilliant articles. Can you just reiterate some of your background?
Yeah, for sure. So my background, I have a MIS, computer science, analytics, schooling type background. I was an analyst at Mimesis Capital, which the CIO over there is Louis Liu. So we did a lot of venture capital in the Bitcoin space. And after that, I did a little bit of technology consulting. And now I'm an analyst, a mining analyst at Blockware Solutions. And we're one of the largest ASIC distributors in the US. We've got a mining pool, we've got everything.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's you guys. Okay, that's interesting. So let's talk about. First, I want to talk about this trending word inflation, or actually hyperinflation. Now, I remember Lynn Alden said on one of her interviews that hyperinflation is when like starting off at 50%. Why is it that high? Why is the bar so high? Why isn't it at 25 or 30%, which we actually have on some, in some services or products? When do we talk about hyperinflation?
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting question. My interpretation of that is that there's just like, a pivotal breakthrough point of like what economists define as hyperinflation. So, like, obviously, if, real inflation is 20-30%, that's still going to cause like extreme price distortions within the economy. Like goods are not going to be priced correctly, equities are not going to be priced correctly, bonds are not going to be priced correctly. So when prices are extremely distorted like that, it doesn't necessarily have to be 50% to really mess up the pricing mechanism within an economic system. And so that would be my interpretation.
Yeah, I think, what is it? It's 50% per month is the quote unquote technical definition of hyperinflation. But I think Joe nailed it. I think once you get above, annual inflation rates of around 20%, that's generally when faith is lost in the currency. I was having a look at all of these hyperinflationary events through history when I was writing about the long-term debt cycle. And most of the inflection points for inflation tends to be around 15 to 20%. That's when the everyday person wakes up and realizes, oh shit, my grocery bill's gone from $100 last year and now it's 120. Shit's moving too quickly. What's going on? And they start questioning money and they start storing their money in anything they can get their hands on, whether that be gold or goddamn used cars. They just get it out of the melting fiat.
Yeah, you probably heard this pretty cool. The one of the most succinct and compact talks Michael Saylor gave with Tucker Carlson. Have you listened to it already? It's pretty dense. I think he had those like enlightening moments. Like he was like talking, but it was really cool because I think he can open up a lot of minds, especially in the boomer circles. That's what other people say too. You know, I mean, I think it was one of his best speeches or deliveries. Now, when he talks about like, okay, first of all, okay, there's currency collapse and, you know, monetary inflation. I mean, like the objective things, you know, we can really measure, right? But the other thing, you know, I think that you touched upon, or both of you, is when the trust in the currency is lost. So how close are we in losing, like as a society, as a whole, you know, civilization, in whatever fiat currency, would it be the, you know, world reserve currency, US dollar or euro or whatever dominating you know, fiat currency? How close are we to losing the trust, the confidence?
So I think we're a lot closer than a lot of people think, because you look at the manipulated CPI inflation metric, and that's telling you inflation is 6.2%. But when you look at the way governments used to measure inflation using shadow stats and the Chapwood inflation index, they show real inflation is much closer to 15, 16%. And I think that's much closer to that kind of tipping point. Like a great example is the Australian housing bubble over here. House prices in every single capital city last year in 2020 rose by over 20 or 25%. Meanwhile, housing in the CPI inflation index rose at like 3%. People know the 3% inflation figures are a lie because they know that housing and rents going up at 25%. So I think most of the larger Western countries, whether that be the Australian dollar, whether that be the US dollar, the euro, I think inflation is much closer to 15%. And I think, as Joe and I both touched on earlier, that tends to be a kind of inflection point. 15 to 20% has pretty big effects on the economy.
Yeah, for sure. Those are good points, Luke. And I kind of have like maybe a line close with Lynn Alden's view on inflation in general, where at least for the U.S., I mean, as far as other countries, I maybe not as certain, but I don't necessarily think hyperinflation could or will happen. I think like the base case is more higher than, you know, the usual 2% CPI rate that we've been told, and I think like even CPI readings itself, which may not be, you know, 100% accurate, obviously, will probably be above 2% itself. And so, one of the reasons why I think that is just because, like Jeff Booth talks about in The Price of Tomorrow, is that technology is accelerating prices downward. And so, as processes and businesses become more efficient, things should really actually be getting cheaper over time. And if we're funneling all this capital into you know, riskier and riskier investments to do new technology like robotics, AI, then it's actually possible that prices, you know, CPI type prices don't go up that much. On the other hand, you gotta keep the debt bubble going, and so you gotta keep getting asset prices up. So that's kind of like, in my opinion, why we've seen, you know, this kind of separation between the wealthy and the poor, is because to keep the system going, we got to keep creating more debt, got to keep creating more credit, which gets funneled, you know, into equities, into bonds. And it doesn't really get funneled into, you know, middle and lower class everyday people. And so, again, I don't know if hyperinflation is necessarily going to happen. If people did just lose faith in it, obviously the dollar is pretty much done, and most fiat currencies are done. Like, that's just been the history of fiat currencies. But would I expect that? Probably not.
I want to agree there with Joe just quickly while we're on debt cycles. That's a great point. Thanks for bringing it up. I kind of agree with that view. I don't think we're going to see the technical definition of hyperinflation in a lot of these Western currencies. I think firstly, they won't let it get there. I think they'll pull a great reset like the World Economic Forum is talking about, or they'll pull a IMF 2.0 moment, some sort of reset before it gets there in Western countries. Like maybe the Australian dollar and the US dollar, Canadian dollar. I wouldn't be surprised if it happened. I've prepared for it, but I'm more expecting, like Joe said, like a period of secular inflation similar to what we saw in the 1940s at the conclusion of that long-term debt cycle. The way governments deal with the debt is they keep inflation at these high levels, 10 to 15%, and they pin interest rates to the zero bound, and they let that real interest rate essentially be 10 to 15, negative 10 to 15% per year for a decade, and they try and inflate away a portion of the debt. So the US did this in the 1940s. They pinned interest rates low at like 2%. They kept real inflation high at like 10 to 15%. And they inflated away the nominal debt from like 120% to GDP to like 80% to GDP between 1940 and 1960. And that's how governments deal with a debt. I think Hirschman Capital did a really good report on this. They showed that since the year 1800, 51 out of 52 countries that have reached a debt to GDP ratio above 130% have defaulted on that debt. And generally, when you've got a magic money printer, the way you default on that debt is to just inflate it all away. So that's my base case with Joe. I don't think we're going to see the technical definition of hyperinflation. We're going to see a period of 10 years where real inflation is above that 10%. It's not going to be transitory. And I think as people wake up that it's not transitory and we're living in this digital age, and like we're talking about it live on a YouTube stream, if people realize that they're going to live for a 10-year period of inflation being high, 5 to 10%, this time around you have an exit valve, and that's Bitcoin. You didn't have that in the 1940s when they were inflating away the debt and living under financial repression. The people had to hold the bonds and the fiat currency that would just getting inflated away. This time you've got an escape valve, and as Christine Lagarde says, she knows it's an escape valve, and they're trying to plug that exit. But obviously we got Bitcoin, so that's where the loss in the faith of the currency goes. People are just going to run for the exit door, and that's Bitcoin.
Okay, that's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing analysis. Thanks for that. So the other question I had is that, okay, first of all, Lynn always like compares these current, things that are going on to the 1940s. Would you agree with that? Because of increase or exponential fiscal spending or whatever she calls it? Is that it?
Yeah, so that's the long-term debt cycle. So there's a 75 to 100-year long-term debt cycle that currencies go through. And in the 1940s, there's a lot of similarities to what we saw in the 1930s and 40s. So essentially, you saw this large credit expansion moving into World War I when you're slowly moving away from the gold standard. Obviously, you saw more credit expansion after World War I. That was the Roaring 20s. And then the 1929 stock market crash, you saw a massive economic depression and deleveraging of the public debt sector. Now, Lynn compares the 1929 stock market crash to the 2008 GFC. So you saw a massive banking crisis, but it wasn't necessarily very, very inflationary because the government wasn't running really, really large fiscal deficits. So after you have the banking crisis in 2008 and 1929, respectively, you go for a 10-year period of slow kind of deleveraging. I think she calls it deflationary deleveraging. So we didn't see really large CPI inflation prints over the past 10 years, and you didn't see that in the decade of the 1930s, the Great Depression. But when you enter the next crisis, so these recessions come along every 7 years, when you get the next crisis, that's generally the second stage of the long-term debt cycle. So that is, again, another decade. And this is generally where central banks will pin interest rates at zero. They can't lower them anymore. After the 08, they could lower interest rates to zero. They tried to raise them in 2018. Obviously, we got the taper tantrum. Obviously, we found out that you can't taper a Ponzi. And now this time they need to run really large fiscal deficits, and the central bank and the government actually work together. They kind of break their independence. We all know they were never independent to start with, but now they're coming out there and actually breaking their independence. Central banks will pin interest rates low, and the government runs really large fiscal deficits. So that's what we saw in the 1940s, really large fiscal deficits. And this is the inflationary part of the devaluation of the debt. So obviously the first 10 years, the first stage of the long-term debt cycle is the deflationary deleveraging. And then the second stage, the second decade, which we've just entered, that's the more inflationary decade.
Yeah, I think Luke's exactly right there. The 2020s are going to be a period of relatively high inflation, like CPI type inflation, while interest rates are pinned towards zero. And the interesting thing that is obviously going to go on during the 2020s is Bitcoin exists. And with Bitcoin existing, with interest rates pinned at zero, we're already starting to see some interesting things happen. MicroStrategy, borrowing dollars at very low interest rates, buying as much Bitcoin as they did. I think I saw the other day that MicroStrategy bought over 20% of all Bitcoin mined since they started buying. And so there's not much Bitcoin like being mined anymore. There's not much Bitcoin for sale. People are holding onto their Bitcoin, and they're game theoretically converging on holding it because it's the one asset in the world where we just can't create more. And so it's going to be super interesting to see how this plays out, because you already seen this in mining companies like Grid is going public via SPAC at $3 billion valuation. You got Riot, you got Marathon, you got Hut, all getting access to this very cheap liquid capital that they can deploy, buy ASICs, and hodl the Bitcoin that they mine. And so unlike previous cycles, like in 2017, miners may have been constantly selling, and even into the 2018 bear market, they constantly were selling Bitcoin just to cover their operating expenses. Now these large mining firms have access to real public capital, and they can actually borrow the money needed to cover their operating expenses. And with more people hodling, the price could shoot higher.
So why aren't there more companies or corporations like MicroStrategy doing exactly the same thing? Is it because Michael Saylor has got sort of the majority of the voting rights? It's sort of it is a public right company, but he's got the voting rights. I mean, he's got the power. He's in control. Or is there other regulatory hurdles, or like what would happen if tens or hundreds of of companies would replicate exactly what Michael Saylor with MicroStrategy has done?
Yeah, I mean, if we have Apple or Microsoft start doing the MicroStrategy playbook, that would be, things could get really interesting really fast. And I definitely think like Saylor having majority of voting rights in MicroStrategy was obviously, he can do whatever he wants basically. And so that kind of, made him agile enough to move very fast and take on what obviously the traditional Wall Street perceives as probably insane. But and so that's one main reason why I don't think we have seen other large public corporations do what Saylor's done. The other thing is, I think it's still so early. Like so few people really understand like what Bitcoin is, and it's truly incredible. And I think as time plays out and we continue seeing like number go up technology like in practice, more and more people will begin catching on and realizing like, hey, like this is the scarcest asset that the world has ever seen. We should probably get some of it.
Do you both think that there are people in decision-making positions, pension funds, or I don't know, sovereign funds? Why? What is the requirement to to feel the pain, or do you like? Is it like, do they seriously not understand like what kind of huge opportunity lies right in front of, in plain sight in front of them? Or what does it take? Why is there still why is there still over 100 trillion bond market? Why isn't still so much money in the bond market if you can see like the average value appreciation of Bitcoin? What is it? What is it stopping? Is it like sort of an intellectual like bias, or what's I'm trying to understand, like, why is it taking so long?
My understanding is a lot of these pension funds have like specific investment mandates where they're required to buy a certain number of fixed income assets. And also, again, I mean, I think some of these people that have been in these large traditional funds for a very long time, like they have like some sort of like perceived career risk. Like they may personally own a small portion of Bitcoin on their personal balance sheet. Doesn't mean that they're going to be one of the first people to come out and say like, hey, like we're allocating 5% of our funds portfolio to Bitcoin. I think they eventually will. I think they're probably going to keep starting small. But yeah, I mean, I think when you're like 50, 60 years old and you've been on Wall Street forever, you're making a comfy salary, big bonus every year. Why go out on a limb and reinvent the wheel when you're already living pretty well? Those are a few of my thoughts.
I think they're coming. Like, I think they come in, but they're just really quiet about it, honestly. Like Argo was another mining company that recently raised, I think, $57 million at an 8% note. They're taking out $57 million of debt. So there's other companies doing it. Obviously, we got El Salvador. They're a goddamn nation state that are embarking on the speculative attack. I think it's happening. It's just happening really slowly. And I think for us Bitcoiners, we don't quite see it. A metric that I look at is coins on exchanges, the Bitcoin actually on exchanges for sale. And for the first time in Bitcoin's life, in its 12-year history, since the March 2020 crash, you also saw an inflection point with coins on exchanges. For the first time in Bitcoin's life, coins actually started leaving exchanges and moving to the long-term holders, people who don't have a history of selling. So in that time, in the past 18 months, you've watched balance on exchange. I think there was over 3 million coins on exchanges. And now today there's like 2.3 million coins. So you've essentially watched 30% of the supply that's normally on exchange and is normally traded. You've watched the 30% of the supply on exchanges just go to the hands of the long-term holders. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're pension funds, corporations, even nation states who are just buying it on the quiet. I think we're watching it, and I think we'll hit an inflection point. And the metric that I'm watching to see when we see that inflection point is the coins on exchanges. When you see that start to drop beneath 2 million coins on exchanges, 1.5 million coins on exchanges, I think it'll be really obvious to see what's happening.
Okay,
100%.
so the chain analysis is really a valuable tool, because I couldn't have never I couldn't make a rhyme out of it. Like what is the significance of this whole on-chain analysis cult? No, I mean, it is super important, but I mean, what else can you read out of chain analysis besides, the diminishing, Bitcoin exchanges going to long-term holders? Is there are there any hints for how this is about to develop or evolve into?
I think on-chain analysis is very interesting. I think, Will does a great job at Blockware Solutions doing all sorts of on-chain analysis in our newsletter. And there's so many different metrics that you can do, but it's definitely you can get caught in the noise. You can confuse, correlation with actual causation. And I'm sure, as many people have seen on Twitter and on YouTube, that probably happens a good bit. But I still think it's an extremely valuable tool. One of my favorites is just HODL waves, where you can see when coins were last moved on chain. And you can clearly see these waves in relation to price in the past. As price starts to run up, more and more coins start to get distributed and sold. And when price starts to reach, bottoming out levels, that's when most coins have not moved in a while. And so it's really kind of fascinating to look at these metrics and see, how it affects the price of Bitcoin.
I was just going to quickly say, I think it's good for long-term trends. I 100% agree with Joe. You can get lost in the noise. And I think a lot of people do, because they try to use it with short-term trading. I think that's not the way to use on-chain. I look at zoomed out, big picture kind of stuff, like coins on exchanges, or just the amount of coins being held by long-term holders. It just keeps hitting all-time highs. So I think it's really good to zoom out and have a look at any big macro shifts.
Right. I want to have your opinion on this whole, discussion going on, debate, pretty hardcore debates. They're two totally divergent opinions and understanding about this stock to flow model, or S2FX or what. I mean, what is it? Could it be a sort of a psychological orientation for people getting into the Bitcoin market? Because, or is it something really something that you can predict with? What is this stock to flow model?
Yeah, stock to flow is super interesting. So I guess if for people that don't know, stock to flow model was basically an idea by a guy named Plan B, a pseudonymous guy on Twitter. And he created this model that models the price of Bitcoin off the stock relative to flow. So how much Bitcoin currently exists in the stock relative to the flow of new Bitcoin being mined every year. And if you actually, I myself tested this when it first came out. I used data from 2009 to like 2013 up to the first halving, and did a regression line on that data, and it fairly accurately predicted the price for the next up until now. It's done pretty well, but obviously it's both are growing exponentially, so it's not necessarily like stock to flow was the exact cause of why Bitcoin has gone up. I typically think that Bitcoin is going up for like two main reasons. And when I say going up, I'm not saying like right now, I'm saying like over the past 12 years or so. Bitcoin's gone up for two reasons. One, it's getting scarcer, so stock to flow is happening. Halvings occur, less self pressure hits the network. That kind of ignites the price, ignites less coins hitting the market, and that gives the jolt of price going up. When price starts going up, people are like, what is this new Bitcoin thing? Like, this is interesting. Like, adoption starts to occur. People that have capital are interested in actually deploying that capital into Bitcoin. And some people are comfortable holding X amount of dollars. Some people are comfortable holding millions of dollars, billions of dollars. And as time goes on, that number continues to get larger because Bitcoin works. Like, it's the scarcest monetary good ever discovered. And so I think stock to flow may not be a perfect model, but I definitely think when halvings occur, that is like a bullish catalyst for Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think it's more, I don't give it, I think it's really interesting because obviously we've never had models before 2019 when Plan B put this out. So in 2016 and that 2017 bull market, nobody had any sort of model to go by. Everybody was just like, this is crazy, this is wild, where does it end? Like not a lot of people were talking about these 4-year kind of halving cycle models. So I think it's really interesting that everybody this cycle is looking at this model and saying, hey, look, we can perfectly predict the top here. It's going to top at 250 or 300K or 288K as one of stock to flow's models say. And I think it's really interesting. I think what Fidelity is an asset manager that has like $10 trillion of assets under management. And they put out like this massive report essentially on stock to flow. And they say, hey, look, price of Bitcoin's going to hit, $100 million by 2035. I think that's really interesting. And I think when you start having banks and high net worth individuals looking at these reports done by asset management firms like Fidelity, who's pretty well respected if they've got $10 trillion of assets under management, if they're looking at Fidelity and saying, who's saying Bitcoin's going to hit $100 million by 2035, I think you're going to have a lot of people just simply front run Fidelity and start front running all of these models and all of these predictive, quote unquote, models that start coming out. So I think when everybody's aware of the model, it starts to break. I think Bitcoin Tina says it differently. He says, when you think you found the keys to the market, they change the locks on you. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen a lot sooner than a lot of people think. And I think when stock to flow breaks, it's going to break to the upside. And I think the Bitcoin price is going to shock people.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I actually said it from the beginning, even to Plan B in one of the tweets or DMs, or I said, listen, I mean, your model is, it looks great, but I think even it could supersede, or what do you call it, like exceed the expectation and even go way beyond, what is sort of drawn out or predicted according to his model. So I wouldn't be surprised, maybe that. So this is what I said. I said this is sort of a very conservative approach, to how this could at least, minimalistically like develop. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Bitcoin at the end of the day is a ticking time bomb. I mean, any large whale, large corporation, government could have came in the past 10 years and just completely obliterated every other model that we've ever looked at. I think that's true today. I mean, if Apple comes out tomorrow and says, we're going to buy $50 billion worth of Bitcoin, the price is not going to be sitting at $50,000 anymore. I mean, it takes one individual or one group of people to really, change the market here, just because it's so early. It's really incredible.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm totally aware everything is dynamic. The market is dynamic. You can't predict really anything. I mean, geopolitics, macroeconomics. I mean, this whole situation, which I want to talk to you about, because it goes to the essence, to the core of why I'm into Bitcoin. It's all about, it's, finally, having a life of freedom and liberty and autonomy, self-autonomy and self-sovereignty, as it's called. But it seems like we're going into totally opposite direction, especially now in Austria. We're talking about Australia, Luke. I mean, if this law goes into effect, which has also already been drafted as a draft, but if it goes into effect, it means mandatory vaccination. So I don't want to like jump from one thing to another, but it is totally interconnected what we're talking about. Joe, you just said it could really happen, just a ticking time bomb. So, but this is my question to like, what are the parameters? What factors would need to unfold in order to, because I'm really surprised that it's El Salvador as the only country that has adopted Bitcoin's legal tender, and now wanting to put up like what is it, $500 million volcano bond. Is why is it so slow with with the smaller countries, with the smaller like nation states? What is it taking so long? I mean, it's just a little bit, I don't know, it's baffling me a little bit.
I think all the catalysts are there. I think they're all there, Kayvan. I mean, I think technologies get adopted in these kind of exponential waves. So the first 10 years of a technology, it generally takes a very long time for that technology to bootstrap itself and go from 0 to 10% adoption. But generally, once it's kind of made those bootstrappings and it's got to 10% adoption, the next 10 years of adoption happens very rapidly. And generally in all of these technologies like the internet, smartphones, podcasting platforms, generally takes the same amount of time to go from 10% to 90% adoption as it did to go from 0% to 10% adoption. So I think Bitcoin's in a very similar kind of way. I look at Bitcoin in the same way. We've had 12 years of very gradually. I think we're going to watch the next 10 years and it's going to happen very suddenly and very quickly. And like you said about the lockdowns and all of that kind of tyrannical government overreach, I think that's another catalyst that's just going to force people into the Bitcoin space really, really quickly. I mean, how long until they start shutting off bank accounts for people who don't have certain medical inoculations? Over here in Australia, they're already taking money out of people's bank accounts who don't pay their COVID fines. I mean, that's a massive advertisement for Bitcoin. Earlier we talked about the financial repression involved with trying to sustain a debt bubble that has a global debt to GDP ratio of 350%. They're literally inflating people's savings and pension funds and superannuations away at 10 to 15% per annum. If that's not a perfect advertisement for Bitcoin, and then you also layer in the tyrannical government overreach, I think that's another perfect advertisement for freedom money and Bitcoin. So I think the next part of Bitcoin's adoption is going to happen really quickly and really rapidly. All the Bitcoiners like us.
And unexpectedly, you think? Like,
yeah.
See like some hints like on the horizon. Oh, this is, I mean, no, my question to you, Luke, is because you're from, you're in Australia, you experience this whole madness. I mean, it's so fucking insane what's going on at the moment. I mean, we need to pack our stuff probably in the next few months if this goes through, because I mean, okay, you pay maybe the first time. We don't even know how they're going to measure the penalties, the first, second time, but eventually a second, third time, it's going to be like in thousands of years of penalty. I mean, we're eventually going to get out of this country. I mean, we need to get out of this country. The question is, I mean, are we still by then able, like in some countries, you can't even get out of the country because you're not vaccinated or you don't have a vaccine pass. So what I'm trying to say is, like, my question to you, Luke, is it because this incredible rate of speed in how they're implementing this tyrannical, dictatorial Nazi regimes everywhere. I mean, in Austria, I mean, you could have never believed that. If you have told me that like a couple of years, I mean, it would have been impossible just even to fathom, like Austria, the romantic, nostalgic country, it's insane. It's insane. So my question is, do you think governments or whoever is in, you know, in this decision making, do you think they already know the shit is about to hit the fan, and that's why they need to accelerate this process? And do we as Bitcoiners, or, you know, this Bitcoin space, is it sort of in a timely race against this whole tyrannical unfolding? You know what I'm getting at?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. The speed of the growing tyrannical fascism around the world actually makes me bullish. It kind of reassures me that governments are freaking out and they know that they need to grasp as much control as possible. I mean, I think the quote was in The Sovereign Individual, a book written like 20 years ago. As nation states fall and as nation states crumble, don't be surprised about all the tyrannical things they do. And in the book 25 years ago, they were talking about a fake bioweapon virus that a nation state would implement so that they can close the borders, so they don't let the sovereign individual and the what do they call them, digital nomads, jump from tax haven. So the speed of the tyranny makes me bullish, because it reassures me that they know they're freaking out and they're just grabbing for as much control as possible. We're watching the collapse of the nation state as we're transitioning into the digital age, and I think we are racing something. That's something else you mentioned, Kayvan. I think they're racing, trying to get the CBDCs out before the inflation really starts to kick into the next gear. I think that's one race we're going through. And then something else you mentioned, you talked about where do you go? And it's kind of like, I've asked myself this question a lot as well, because mandatory vaccinations, they're coming in Australia. They're already being done. I think recently in the Northern Territory, they forcibly vaccinated like 20 to 30 Aboriginals. I'm pretty sure that's just out there. That's common knowledge now. I mean, so it's coming for me. It's coming for all of us. I think it's coming for everyone who's not in the US. So it's kind of like, do you waste all the time in moving to another country? What if the country you move to, like Mexico, for example, they've said they're not going to do vaccines or anything like this? What if they change their rules and now you're stuck in a foreign country with no friends, no family around you, and then you're in the same situation that you would have been in Austria? So I think for me personally, when I look at the countries to go to, the only safe countries really look to be the red states in the US. They're probably not going to go along with the forced vaccines. I'm looking at Mexico as like a second option, but again, like, you're removing yourself from a potential little citadel you could have where you live locally. You could have lots of friends and families, lots of local farmers that I mean, the size of the protests in Austria look pretty big from what I'm looking at. Yeah. So what are they going to do? They're going to come forcibly vaccinate millions of people?
Well, I don't know how insane. I don't know how crazy these people are. I mean, maybe they're so... sometimes I'm asking myself, like, who are these people? Like in whatever these political puppets, are they really like groomed, like disciples of Klaus Schwab, young global leaders? Or seriously, Sebastian Kurz, we know for sure, the resigned, chancellor, this young, chancellor resigned just recently because of, corruption. So, I mean, we know a lot of these, people in different countries, just starting in the EU, they're all groomed. I mean, they're all so-called graduates of the Young Global Leaders program. And I don't know, I mean, I don't know how insane this whole thing is. Maybe they don't have to lose. Maybe maybe they know that they need to push this because they need to, first of all, save their face, because they know it's already too late. The damage has already been incurred. I mean, all the, adverse reactions, the deaths underreported, in America, Joe, the VAERS system, it's like maximum 10% reported. I mean, we're talking about this is studies being done by Harvard, and they're saying even in normal circumstances, only up to 10%. And maybe it's even just 1%, who knows, but maybe the real number of deaths, caused by this experimental, highly toxic mRNA, whatever gene editing, gene therapy vaccine with spike proteins. I mean, people are so fucking insane. They want to inject their children. I mean, they're so fucking proud to inject their children. Now in Austria, they're propagating it for, starting at least with 12, mandatory vaccination with 12. I mean, this is insane. What's your take on that, Joe? I mean, America is much better, to be honest. If I had the choice right now, I would write, we would go directly to Austin or, Florida, like real, super conservative, if you want to call them, or self-sovereign libertarian, cities or states who have, compared to Austria, they have much more power over the federal overreach, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think that states like Texas, Florida are like somewhat safe havens for freedom-minded people. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But at the end of the day, I think exponentially growing governments, exponentially growing power, the introduction of CBDCs, that's only going to push more and more people towards Bitcoin. Like people. It's funny because like when you watch like Bloomberg or CNBC, people think, oh, CBDCs could be a threat to Bitcoin. But in reality, it's like, no, it's just going to show the value proposition that Bitcoin actually provides. Like it's a censorship resistant freedom money. And so people will be able to use it. They'll be able to send it to whoever they want, whenever they want. And, it can't be debased. And so, I think these like growing tyrannical like pressures pushing people to, compelled to like comply to do certain things is just going to end up speeding up the adoption of Bitcoin and similar minded technologies.
Yeah, I remember, Dr. Jordan Peterson, recently, I think he was so pissed off. I think he tweeted something like, well, I got my double jab now. Like, just leave the fuck, just leave me the fuck alone, and I felt his anger, and I'm like, how many people, I mean, Jordan Peterson is like super like intelligent, intellectual. He's like, he groks Bitcoin. Like, when was it? Like, who was he talking with? Safed Namus, I think, he was like, you saw that aha moment, in his eyes, like, what the fuck, And I'm like, okay, I mean, you can't compare the masses. I mean, I have a lot of respect for every human being, but we just look around, we always talking, with my girlfriend about, what's going on with other people, other Bitcoiners. It's like zombified. People are like under some kind of, I don't know what it is, mass hypnosis, mass psychosis, the indoctrination, the media, they believe everything, they're being displayed on or shown on TV, on mainstream news. It's insane. So I don't know how much hope I have in the masses, and I'm sure there are people waking up like, okay, like when does it stop? Okay, I got my double jab now. I mean, we don't, yeah, but the people, I'm just pretending, I'm putting myself into the shoes of these people. Like, okay, okay, you got yourself a double jab now. Like, when does it stop? Like, next booster shot and next booster shot, and then in every 3 or 6 months, they're already proposing like every 3 or 6 months a fucking booster shot. I mean, when does it stop for people? When do they, wake up out of their, I don't know, what is it? What is this, psychologically speaking?
I think it's the collapse of the currency. When the currency goes, they'll realize that the COVID scamdemic was all just a massive scapegoat, or as I call it, just the controlled demolition. Like, we're watching the largest bursting of a sovereign debt bubble in human history. We've had hundreds of episodes of hyperinflation, but this is the first hyperinflationary event that you're going to see on a global scale, on a globally interconnected financial system. If one large currency goes, they all go, because they all own each other's debt. So that means that it's going to be a global collapse. Now, how are you going to explain a global collapse to every citizen around the world? You need a global scapegoat or a global something to say that's what caused it. It was the bloody COVID. It was the COVID. It was the lockdowns. It was the supply chains. That's what's causing the inflation. It was the climate change. It was the climate change that caused the inflation. Like, these people have been planning this for decades. Operation Lockstep was written in 2008, 2009, talking about how they'd use a global lockdown and a fake virus to grab more power and control out of people. They've just been simulating and waiting for the right moment. Obviously, 2019, you saw the yield curve invert in mid-2019. That's predicted 9 out of 10 recessions for the past 100 years. We knew a recession was coming in 2019. The repo market blew up in September of 2019. The Fed was printing hundreds of billions of dollars in October of 2019.
And 40% of all US dollars printed. Is it true, like, in the last 2 years? Is that true, Joe? I mean,
this
is crazy.
Funny. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's pretty insane. I mean, who knows what's going to happen. I definitely think that, COVID has obviously been used as a scapegoat. Like there were signs like we were in one of the largest bull runs in history, and like you can keep credit expanding for a long time and keep, the market churning, but eventually, you're going to have some sort of like, crash from that, whether it's the housing bubble, the dot-com bubble, or, the everything bubble that we're probably currently in right now. And yeah, it's just going to be fascinating. And obviously, like COVID was a great scapegoat. Like here's this virus. This will, obviously allow us to print trillions of dollars. We can lock everyone down like short term, and hope, say like, oh, this is why the economy collapsed, and this gives us a reason to pursue our modern monetary theory policies. And so yeah, it's just going to be an interesting decade probably.
Okay, I want to slowly like wrap up, guys. I need to get back to my daughter, baby. But I do want to wrap it up like on a positive note, and that's why I want to go back to that point you already started elaborating on, Joe. I guess we're all huge fans of Jeff Booth. The Price of Tomorrow, why deflation is the key to an abundant future is great. I mean, Jeff Booth is just he's such a he breaks down things like for people, even for normal, like for average people, like what does it mean to be in a Bitcoinized or hyper Bitcoinized world where you have deflationary prices, you pay less and less for better, more innovative products, services, technologies, on every level, and not only in the digital realm, but this is why I'm trying, to emphasize, like on every structural level, like, because we as humanity, as civilization, we're going to grow, we're not just going to, stick with 8 billion people. We're going to grow. So we need more infrastructure. We need better, more efficient transportation, health technologies. I don't know, organic food. That's why, I want to have your perspective, your vision. What could the world look like in a Bitcoinized world where we have, or it's just starting as a pilot project, maybe in a free private cities, maybe because this is, is a very, very sort of very important topic at the moment for all of us, I guess, like where do we want to live? Like in what kind of structure or what kind of contractual relationship do we want to live? What's your vision?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's super interesting because if Bitcoin's like a real, very interesting economic experiment, I would say. If you go to traditional university, they're going to say, hey, you need 2% CPI inflation for an economy to function properly. And people have won Nobel Prizes off of this. That and they think like the idea of being able to centrally plan money can help them manufacture economic growth. Whereas in every other free market like that's ever existed, you can't centrally plan it. You can't centrally plan prices, and so money is supposedly the one good where you have to plan how to price it. So I kind of have this idea of maybe like that's not necessarily like correct. Like maybe like the free market for money, embracing deflation, as Jeff Booth says, could actually lead to like a massive productivity boom, like for pretty much everyone that embraces it. And so like Bitcoin is the best money. There's only 21 million. And the money is basically a call option on all future capital forever. And obviously Bitcoin is the world's best money because of its unique properties. It's scarce, divisible, portable, transactable. And so if you come to that conclusion and it's number go up technology, you recognize that, then basically like the future real return of Bitcoin, once we've reached, relatively full adoption of whoever's going to use it, you could basically expect like the future return of Bitcoin to be equivalent to like the S&P 500 or a diversified, portfolio that you have in your 401k today. And so I think a large majority of the world in the future will just hold Bitcoin. They won't necessarily, hold stocks. They won't necessarily hold bonds. Like they'll just hold Bitcoin. They can be entrepreneurs if they want, and they can pursue projects that are interested to them, but they don't have to. Like that's the important thing. They have the freedom to not do that. And so, traditional economists are going to say like, oh, well, if everyone's just hoarding Bitcoin, they're just sitting on their Bitcoin, that would slow growth. And so I kind of think that might be wrong. So I think growth could drastically accelerate because I think the market converging on, holding Bitcoin
I couldn't agree more. I just co-sign everything Joe just said. I think everything on a Bitcoin standard is going to be so much improved on today's society and the economy today. I don't think we can actually conceptualize the world that we're moving into in the digital age. I think Bitcoin's going to change so many facets of society. I think it's going to separate money and state for the first time in human history. And I think that's going to be amazing to watch. I think governments are going to have to become service providers as opposed to what they are today, where it's more a master and slave relationship that we have with our governments. And I think Bitcoin's going to demonetize all of these things that have been used as a store of value, like real estate right now. Nobody can afford real estate. The long-term average price of a home before 1970 was like 3 times your annual income. So it was like if your annual income's $50,000, a typical average house should be $150,000. And it was very affordable, 3 times your average income. Now in most capital cities around the world, it's more like 10, 15 times your annual income. The everyday person can't buy a home because homes are being used as a speculative store of value. And I think Bitcoin's going to demonetize that $350 trillion global real estate market. Bitcoin's going to demonetize the $130 trillion bond market. Bitcoin's going to demonetize all of these de facto store of values. And I think it's going to have big impacts on society. People are going to actually have abundance. People are going to actually be able to own a home and be able to actually afford things into the future. So I honestly cannot wait for Bitcoin to separate money and state. I think we're probably living in the most interesting few years coming. I think the next 2 to 3 years will probably be the most interesting years in human history. People think that sounds hyperbolic, but the separation of money and state's never been seen before. We've never seen a form of money that is absolutely scarce, absolutely unconfiscatable, and just absolutely uncorruptible. So I can't wait to watch it.
Yeah. You said something very important, Luke. You said we've never had the experience. We don't know what it's like. I mean, like we're talking like, okay, but, or Safida Moose talks about, the civilization, what does he call it? La Belle Epoque or something, where people were in the golden age, there were sort of more 0 to 1 innovations. It's a very, very thrilling and very exciting chapter in the Bitcoin standard, which I love. It's just a few pages, but I hope he's going to elaborate more in his new book, the Fiat Standard, or what the world could look like. I mean, there's so many technologies out there which have been, suppressed or not, developed, or just, very compartmental, isolated into the military industrial complex. So I can't wait, because this is what humanity needs eventually, to evolve, to prosper and to live in abundance. But that would mean, like, on every level we can think of, even habitation, like how you live, housing, habitation, where you live, how you transport yourself. All these things, like have super healthy food, like super organic, like, we all want to, eat finally not some sludge or, soybeans or whatever, or live in our pods. But so this is what they want to sell us, so this idea of you don't, very open, right? Like very openly, like you don't own anything, but you be happy and you're going to eat some whatever artificially synthetically created meat. I mean, it's mind boggling. But yeah, so this is the future we are, I think, heading towards too. And this is the sole reason I think I'm into Bitcoin, because I already see the future, and like you guys. But for most people, they just cannot imagine working less. Maybe you'll have the choice of working whatever 10, 15, 20 hours voluntarily, and the rest of the time you can contribute back to society with your knowledge, with your skills, with your talents, with your professionalism, whatever, with your ideas, with your creativity, with your research, science, technology. So this is what has been actually stolen from us through the fiat system, in at least the last 100 years. Would you agree?
Yeah,
Couldn't agree more.
Under a Bitcoin standard, we have no idea like how great this is going to be. So I think it's going to be fantastic.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to own Bitcoin and I will be happy. I won't be living in the pods. Fuck Bill Gates, and I won't be eating his soy burgers. I think the Bitcoin standard will be a great thing to watch. I think people will actually be incentivized to actually produce value for society. People right now are just incentivized to cozy up to the quintillionaires who own the money printer. And the closer you are to the money spigot, the more productive, or the greater value that you have. I think it's going to completely flip those incentives upside down. And I think we're moving into the modern day renaissance. I think earlier we were talking about the separation of money and state. I think Bitcoin is the printing press. Like, the printing press was the technology that separated church and state in the 1500s. It freely decentralized and democratized information for all by printing the Bible into books and into all these different languages. And the everyday person realized, oh shit, hang on, we don't need the church and state anymore. They're a corrupt institution. They're lying to us. I think Bitcoin is the technology akin to the printing press that's going to decentralize and democratize a savings account for everyone. Right now, everybody thinks and they believe the government propaganda that's fed to them by the state's little friends, the intellectuals at the universities, saying, no, don't worry. Saving is a bad thing. You're supposed to get your savings inflated away. Trust us. Keynesian economics is the way. It's all modern monetary theory. But I think Bitcoin,
and as Lagarde said, you should be grateful, that you have a job, I mean,
yeah.
How fucking arrogance. I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's just so mind-boggling. This the mindset of these people. Anyway, guys, I really enjoyed our fantastic talk. Any final thoughts you want to leave my listeners with, or where they can find you, or any other information that we might have forgotten?
Yeah, so I'm 3Capital on Twitter. Follow me. Like I said at the beginning, I'm a mining analyst at Blockware Solutions. So check out our website, blockwaresolutions.com. Subscribe to our newsletter. Me, Will Clemente, and Blake Davis are posting out content every week. So look forward to talking with you. Like, DMs are open. So if you have questions or want to get in contact, just send me a message.
Yeah, firstly, thank you so much for having me. I've had an absolute blast, and it was great to meet both of you guys face to face for the first time. I'll probably leave the listeners with just one line: you are not prepared. I think Guy Swan and Knut Van Home put a really good video kind of detailing how the Bitcoin adoption is going to occur. And I think a lot of people are predicting, now that the big institutions are here, the volatility is going to mute and it's going to decrease. I don't think that's the case. I think the Bitcoin volatility hasn't even begun to increase yet. And I think it's going to melt a lot of faces. So I'll just say to the new people out there, psychologically prepare yourself for Bitcoin prices that you may not be ready for, and go and do the work and understand why you don't want to be selling Bitcoin at $2 million a coin, $5 million a coin, even $10 million a coin is ridiculously underpriced and cheap for where Bitcoin should be long term. So psychologically prepare yourself for how hyper Bitcoinization may unfold. I think it's going to shock a lot of people. You can find me on Twitter. I'm always ranting and raving over there on Twitter Spaces. I think my handle's Luke Mikic 21. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, and keep up the really great work, and the articles you put out. It's really amazing. It's really eye-opening for a lot of people. So thank you so much again, and yeah, talk to you soon. All right. Have a great day.
Bye. See you guys.